Yeah,
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm super curious. What I think piqued this whole thing for me is that you said you breastfed for 10 years, and I think that that is amazing and insane. And
Those are
I,
two good words to describe it. Yeah.
um, and so then I started, trying to dig a little deeper and research and see what else I could find. Um, so yeah, so you're a doctor, and I don't know if you're a doctor in a very specific thing or so
Yeah, I'm a
explain.
psychologist. Yeah. So I have a doctor of psychology. I see patients right now in my home in private practice and so I specialize in longer term psychotherapy.
Okay, and I saw that you deal with a few different specific things, or like essentially life management. Is that a way to kind of summarize, or what are the very like, because I mean, for example, and we kind of mentioned this. So my aunt also
Mhm.
has, I think, a similar degree. Like she can
Mhm.
write prescriptions, and she's she was a psychologist for a long time, or
So
maybe.
if she can write prescriptions, she's a psychiatrist and
Okay,
has a medical degree. So I don't have a medical degree. I always pursued the specifically clinical psychology track,
okay,
is working in. I mean, clinical psychology is itself a very broad field.
yeah,
You can, but I do practice without prescription. And psychotherapy and psychoanalysis is focused more on longer term therapies, especially which even without being longer term, what it assumes first of all is we have a conscious mind and management skills
hmm,
and intentions and ego.
okay,
But in addition to that, we have an unconscious mind, and we are affected by things that we wish we weren't affected by.
okay,
Things that we've repressed, things that we never knew, things that come up by way of dreams or by way of, surges of emotion, whether they be anger or excitement or, all manner of things, but that aren't, there's this tandem relationship between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. And so the kind of practice I do is a modern version of psychoanalysis, in which we work with both of those forces. And so I guess I wouldn't say it's management as much as kind of like an active discovery
got
in
it.
in working with the psyche.
Hmm. And it's a much more holistic approach,
Hmm.
which
Yeah.
is amazing because it's like, as we know, there's a pandemic going on now, but there's a pandemic that's been going on with, drugs and overuse of all these things. So it's like, why take that route when you could really just do it in a holistic way because it almost seems like, especially now that like I have a kid and I'm kind of an adult, or whatever, like there are so many things that truly have been repressed, like just pressed away and shoved in a closet and pushed, and you just keep going through life, and it's like a lot of times people don't just deal with what's at hand or
Mhm.
what happened when they were a kid, or um my point with this is that I'm realizing that there's so many, and I think it's everyone has some sort of parent issues, right?
Mhm.
Because now that I'm a parent, I'm realizing that it's tough, and my little one's
And
tiny.
I'm so glad you're saying that, because one of the real misconceptions about any kind of therapy that brings in issues of parenting and childhood is, I think, initially can be seen as like blaming, and it's not about blaming. It's sort of, we all, even when we have the best of parents and the best of intentions, life is complex and life is limited. Every time you have something, you don't have something else, and that's
Mhm.
okay. That's the way it should be. I mean, we're not meant to have everything, but if we don't deal with that, we kind of anticipate that we should be able to have everything.
Mhm.
And so a lot of what therapy is also reckoning with what has been and what hasn't been, and sort of who you are in the mix of all of that. But I think you're saying something more specific about parenting, and absolutely, it really, becoming a parent throws you necessarily into your experiences as a child,
Mhm.
what your limitations are when you're like, I don't have any resources, or why am I so angry, or
Why don't I
you're the
have
most
patience for this?
amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
right. Or even you're the most amazing thing in the world, and all of my energy has to go into my child instead of anything else. And
Mhm.
like, yeah,
Well,
but
and that with that, it's like, and this is something now that I've been speaking with so many more moms, all you, and as a new mom, and I'm sure, and you have a couple of kids, like it happens with each kid each time. And as they get a little older, I'm sure that it gets a little easier to just kind of let them be independent. But when they're little, it's like all your time, all your energy is going to that kid. And you still have a husband and parents and siblings and friends and other people that, and a dog that want your attention. And it's like, you could, and a job or a career or whatever it is. And you really do become spread thin. And I don't think that women anticipate it, and men don't understand because they're the one, everyone's just pulling. And I think that it's a really interesting, because all women go through it
right.
and no men go through it, because they're not, even if they're the ones at home, they're not the ones that the kid came out of, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, right, and all of the other things that are tied to that, the hormonal
Yeah.
components and the sort of cultural and psychological lineage that's carried through women. Yeah.
So yeah, so I want to know about your breastfeeding journey.
Yes. So, well, when I something that I often forget is that when my first child was born, I have three kids. When my first son was born, he was born with some complications where actually we weren't able to nurse in the beginning because he had to be in the NICU. So I was pumping from the very beginning. He had a hard time latching, even in those moments where we were able to try and breastfeed. And it was so painful. And um, I thought that it was impossible. I used, breast shields, which who knew those were a thing. And
It's crazy.
now we know. And yeah. And I think so. He was in the hospital for 10 days. Most of those were where he was in the NICU, and I was sleeping in a closet somewhere where they
Mhm.
supplied me with a pump, which was, very good because, or at a certain point, I could run to him and actually nurse him in person. So that then, my milk was in, and we had established that when he came. But I think that it began with the difficulty of our relationship and sort of anticipating that he was fine. I mean, it was a perfectly fine pregnancy. The labor was really long, but I didn't anticipate that there would be any difficulty. And so then hit with this real trauma of my child could have died and what is going on. I think I never wanted to let him go. And then, he loved breastfeeding, and I came into my body. Like, I didn't have a real, like, I've watched some of your other podcasts, and like athletes, and the way I think some people relate to their body in a very like primary way. I didn't have that at all until I had my first child and I started breastfeeding. So that's kind of the background of like it became like I came into myself, and like the fact that these breasts are like really useful and something to be proud of. And like I don't care who sees. I did care for a while. Did the whole breastfeeding in the bathroom thing with shame. Got over that. Said like that's your all problem.
Yeah.
And then it was such a part of my identity, and like kind of I joined the Leche League. The friends that I had as mothers came from there, and it really was a strengthening thing for me. And I want to emphasize that because now in hindsight, I see that where like the Leche League and a kind of um, return to attachment parenting and a kind of very attached embodied mothering can be difficult and hurtful for a lot of people, not an option for a lot of people. And I see those things now, but it's not something I ever experienced. It was quite the opposite for me. Um, and so, yeah, like it, I didn't want to stop, and my child didn't want to stop, and I don't remember what happened in those first couple of years. And it, anytime I sort of thought, "Is this going to stop?" I'll wait and let him, guide that weaning process, and he never did. And then I got pregnant again, and you can tandem nurse, you can nurse through pregnancy, and I did those things.
That's so,
I
it's crazy because they say that when you're breastfeeding, you can't get pregnant. Like it's part of, because
It is a kind of natural birth control, especially for the first year. I mean, like, like, especially if you've pumped, you can see the quality of your milk changing. The fat content goes down the older your baby gets. And I think it
Mm.
has something to do with the fat content of what your body produces in milk, that once that goes down, then your body's no longer suppressing the pregnancy hormones. And that happens usually around a year.
That's so interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, but it
Um,
is definitely some form of birth control in the beginning.
okay. Yeah, because I've heard of women who say, yeah, no, they haven't gotten pregnant, it's no issue. And then I've also heard of women who say, no, we're pregnant again and it's an issue. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to hear. Okay, so that makes sense, the fat content.
Mhm.
How long did it take for you to kind of get comfortable with the breastfeeding? Like, and I mean in public, or like, being shamed or feeling shameful
Yeah.
versus.
Um, I would say probably 4 months. And so much of that does come from your personal background. I think, you know, I went like I was working in a counseling center, and it was the end of the year, and we all went out for like a dinner, and I brought my son, and he was a couple of months old. And I mean, these are amazing people. These were my colleagues who really, also some also had children. They really cared about me. And um, I know I had the idea that it was unacceptable to nurse in public, certainly around your colleagues or at the dinner table. And so I remember going to the bathroom in like this tiny little stall, sitting on the toilet seat and nursing. And um, it wasn't brought on by any of those people there. And then when I moved back to my home state, I was like around my family more, and certainly like bodies are things that you cover up.
Right.
And I started, like, because I was on the couch at home different hours of the day, I started being like, I don't care. And this is what my son needs. And then would get sort of comments of like, oh, that's interesting. No, you never, like, since when do you show your breasts? And so I think that it took a while. And I think, I would definitely say to any mom out there who, I hope they don't, but I know that it's probably not true. Anyone who feels shame about showing their breasts or breastfeeding in public, that's one of the things that they're there for. And that shame, it really comes from someone else. And
Mhm.
um, you know please be welcome to do it.
Yeah, it's weird, right? Like, for whatever reason, women feel, not all, but they, and we do. I felt it when I was breastfeeding. Like I would go, we'd be having a picnic, and I'd go to the car and sit in the back seat,
Mhm.
and like we'd be with a couple who she had a set of twins, and like another, like they have kids, so she knew how it worked. Like I'm thinking about one specific incident, and I still, like, it had nothing to do with them, and it is all just internal. But I think
Mhm.
that it's so interesting because even when you are really comfortable with your body, you still feel like, well, I don't want to make anyone else uncomfortable. I think
Mhm.
that that's what it is. But there is, like, you turn into a walking milk machine. I don't even think of them as boobs anymore or breasts. Like, it's just,
Mhm.
they just milk when they would just leak when she would
They have a
cry.
mind of their own, for sure.
Yeah, like,
Especially
and
when you
they,
get a baby within like 5 feet of it.
yeah, totally. So it's like there's a time period where they're not even
Yeah.
boobs or sexual or nothing. They're just truly
But
just
how much do you think
food.
it's the separating the maternal body and the sexual body that is does kind of feel like a social mandate of
Well, it's hard, and it's this is something that I constantly think about and I talk about because and now that Axel's a little bit older, it's a little easier, but definitely for the first few months as a female, it's very difficult or nearly impossible to separate sexuality, motherhood, as an individual, who are you and
Mhm,
how do you distinguish?
mhm. Well, I guess, for me, I think that's important almost not to distinguish it. I mean, there's different times for different things, but what I mean about that mandate is almost like, you know, you're sexy until you're a mother, or you're a sexual woman unless you're a mothering woman.
Mhm.
And, of course, we know that's not true. Like, we're we're more of each because we're both. That's how I think. And
100%.
but I think that even regardless of the shame that I had from my body in general, that there is a kind of cultural, like, we don't want to see that. We want to see you as a sexual body, and or not at all.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
that's why it's so funny is because like I truly, and I say this in my intro, which is I think what catches so many people is like everyone wants to see your boobs until you're breastfeeding, and it's so true. And it's
Mhm.
like, but
Yeah.
also to your point, I think that I've spoken with so many women that once they become pregnant, they just something falls in place and they feel the most empowered, the most sexy, the most feminine, the most woman that
Hmm.
they ever felt when they're pregnant. And it's
Yeah.
amazing because it's like there's no reason you shouldn't feel that way. Like you should always be comfortable in your body, but if this is something that makes it click, then
Hmm.
good. Like this is something that it is so empowering. And for whatever reason, I don't unless you've been there, I think that it's really hard to understand.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that really became true for me in giving birth. Like, it's definitely already true in walking around with this baby inside of you. That, I mean, it's this whole process that's working without your intention anyway. um but then giving birth, and I had three natural childbirths. They, like, of course, there's these moments of, this isn't possible, and like, this is just not possible. Someone else, if somebody else wants to step in here and do this, go right ahead. Or just like, when it's not happening. And
it's
then,
a wild thing.
but then, like, of course, nobody else does it. Like, I did that, and I and my child together, like, we were the ones who did that. And I think it's that, and all of the ways in which that happens in pregnancy and in breastfeeding is like, is the most empowering thing in the world, because it's like nobody can say what my body can and can't do, because my body's doing it.
Exactly.
It's not up to anyone else.
Exactly. Okay, so I am, and I think you probably know this about me at this point because we've talked a lot outside this. I'm super bouncy, so I'll go way over here and then I might not come back over here. So I'm trying to get better at this. So
Yeah, well, me too. We always come back. So that's great. Where are we coming back to?
we're going back to the breastfeeding.
Yes.
So you were breastfeeding, and then you got pregnant, and
Mhm.
then
Yeah. So my son was not ready to stop breastfeeding, and I thought, he didn't choose to have a sibling, so, like, why not, let's keep going. And it was also painful because you don't produce as much milk, and your breasts are tender in pregnancy anyway. So, like, yeah, that was at times painful, but only so much. I wouldn't have endured it if it was just painful. It was also like, it was really, really special to be able to feel still close to him while I was feeling this,
creating
close
another human.
to another developing baby. Yeah. And I think for me, that's also really important about being a mother, is like, where so much of the rest of the world is about competition, especially to have more than one child is like, how in the world do you all get along? And I don't have favorites. And, now they're nearly teenagers and they probably wouldn't say they get along all that well, but I think they do. And like, there's room. I mean, there's at least two boobs, right? Like, um, and so, yeah, when my second child was born, we didn't stay in the hospital even one night. She was born in
Wow.
the hospital, but she came home right away, so quick. And from there, they got to nurse even at the same time together. We had a special chair. It was like one of my favorite things. And then there's 3 years gap between my second and third children, and so we did sort of the same thing. But my son, gosh, I'm sorry, I don't even remember how he weaned. I think at some point the timing might be that I got pregnant with my third kid, and I was like, okay, don't have three boobs. I'm gonna have to work this one out. Um, but so he was like 4.5 when he weaned, and I'm certain, I do know I did that. Like, he was never going to do it.
You're like, sorry, buddy.
Yeah, yeah. But it's been a good ride. We'll keep going in other ways. And sure enough, yeah, he really got into drawing. He would draw for like 4 hours a day then.
Helpful tips.
Yeah. So, but then in sort of a fairness, they all weaned at the same age. Um, but when I had my third child, um, I also the age gap changed, and I don't know, I might have even been nursing both of them still, or I might have weaned my second, but I had a lot of milk, and so I also was donating milk. I think I don't know how I found out about this in a hospital I was in.
You were in
Um,
Brooklyn?
no, I was living in Ohio
Okay.
at that time. But you can donate milk, or you can actually sell your milk to for-profit milk banks. And I ended up doing that for a while, which is really, this was in I think that they collect the milk and it usually goes to a national milk bank, and then they disperse it to children, like children in the NICU or with other kinds of like really strong needs for when other their own mother's milk isn't
Yeah.
available to them. But I also, in my community, there was a lesbian couple who just adopted a baby, and like, so I ended up giving most of my extra milk to them, and that was amazing because I got to see the baby, I got to hold the baby, and yeah, those were like, I mean, I can smell it now, and I kind of love it. It's um those are just really, I think, special years that
It is. It's have you heard of this where parents, and I need to do a little more research into it. I mean, I want to actually speak with a lactation consultant about this because they
Mhm.
would probably know all the little details. But apparently, even if a woman doesn't give birth to the baby, like these women who adopted the baby, they can still breastfeed. Have you heard about this?
I don't know much about it, but I have heard about it, that it is possible. Like,
To produce
um,
milk, even if you didn't, which is
yeah,
incredible.
yeah, and I don't know how common it is to be able to do that,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Why? Our bodies are absolutely incredible.
Hmm.
Okay,
And it
so
probably brings something up about like other aspects of attachment to children that aren't your biological children.
I'm sure that it just somehow creates some sort of straight like a stronger bond, or I mean,
Hmm.
because there's I mean, and you would know, but from my understanding there's a lot of benefits aside from just immune support with
Absolutely.
breastfeeding. So I'm sure that all these things also tie into when a baby's adopted.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, yeah, wow. So 10 years, it could have, it was more than 10 years.
Well, actually, because my um, it might have been like slightly under 10
Oh,
years
it's a
because
long
my
time.
yeah, right. Yeah, but my middle, I mean, my youngest child is 5 years younger than her brother. So it was like she ended at 4.5. We've got 9.5 years there.
10, round 10, it's,
In the 10th year. And actually, I had already separated from their father before when my youngest was like in around 3. And so, and we were splitting custody. So I was still nursing her when she wasn't even sleeping in my house every night.
wow.
And that was like, honestly, one of the hardest things about it. I mean, not being with them all together was
Yeah,
really
but
hard. But, you know, she still wanted it. She powered through it. We were, nursing on park benches.
that is
And
awesome though.
yeah, I think that also sort of was a testament to me to just how that was a part of our bond. And it was like she was fine to be without me. And I mean, you know, again, with the whole like you have the things you have and you don't have the things you don't have, she wasn't into, there's loss there, but she was fine. And she was also really happy to be with me that we could share that. And
That's so nice. How does that, and you would just pump, I guess, like when you weren't together.
actually, by then I wasn't, because what maybe in the yeah, because at that point it's like it really was more about the after 2 years, like World Health Organization says that, and that mothers should breastfeed or until around 2, that's it's a health benefit for sure for that long. And after that, like the milk supply, it's sort of like there
Yeah.
or not there. And so I wasn't pumping, um not when she wasn't living with me every night, but I thought if I have it I have it, and if I don't it'll be okay.
Yeah.
And I still had it.
Something that a lot of women talk about with breastfeeding, and I don't think it's so, it doesn't apply. I think each case is different, case by case scenario. But a
Absolutely.
lot of the women who I know who are athletes, as long as they're, and I don't, that's why I want to give an example, and I'm curious about your situation because women who I know who are athletes, as long as they keep their nutrition at a certain level, they can still be very lean,
Hmm.
but produce breast milk. So, like, if you
Hmm.
look at them, they're like ripped, and you
Hmm.
wouldn't think that they could produce breast milk because a lot of times, like, and I remember hearing it that you have to be a little on the not overweight, but like chubby side, and you have to be able to have all this extra fat, and I don't think that that's necessarily true, and I don't know if it's because of why. Because the more that I dug into it when I was breastfeeding about
Hmm.
basically, your, like, my boobs weren't necessarily bigger, they just
Hmm.
had more fatty glands that were producing more milk.
Hmm.
So there's like this misconception that you have to be big or whatever. You weren't, or you were.
I was a little bit on the bigger side, and but I think, and actually, I think that I absolutely became healthier because of being pregnant and postpartum. Just like having to focus on what I mean, my hormones regulated themselves a lot more naturally because they were regulating someone else's.
Right.
Uh, Being prepared to do that, and um, but yeah, I was probably like heavy average or a little bit like on the unhealthy side. But I don't think that that had anything to do with my ability to produce milk. And that was more with my first pregnancy, and then it changed more over time. So yeah, and I don't think that it has anything to do with the weight or the fitness of a person. Like you're saying, a lot of it is nutrition and your what it's very, very important to eat properly
Yeah.
when you're nursing, because it is being produced from it's not coming from anything else but what you put into your own body, and what's not there is being taken from what is there.
Yeah.
uh, but yeah, it's not your fat supply.
It's a really interesting thing, and it's like, it's 20 almost 2021, and it's like there's just no manual on this. And
Hmm.
there's no nothing. Like nothing is even a little concrete. And
Hmm.
there's no, like, yes, there's midwives and there's lactation specialists and there's these types of things, but it's like there's no guide because
Well,
each case is so different, I guess.
I think maybe the thing is there are different kinds of guides, right? There's like I know women who have one, mother or mother-in-law who have very opposing
Mhm.
views of you should nurse no matter how hard it is, and I'm going to be here with you, and I'm going to, give you every resource you have so that you can do this, but with the implicit, statement that you to do anything else would be to fail, which is not true.
Right.
And then another, the other mother saying, like, you should only formula feed, you have to be at work, this is like really suppressing you as a woman, and formula is better, it's been formulated for the child, like. And when we know those are coming from the women in our lives, it's how much is it also coming from the scientific communities, and then other groups with other agendas. And even when there are agendas, I don't think they're implicitly like malevolent, but that there are ideas about what's good, and these ideas can be vastly different from one another.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and a handful of women that have spoken with or I know say that they were just so stressed about breastfeeding that
mhm,
that ended up hindering the milk
yeah,
supply in itself, and it's like,
well, it's really, really a problem when there is, I mean, we already have so many mandates on mothering, right? Like,
hmm
you whatever it is you're supposed to do when you're a mother, you have to keep your body looking a certain way, you have to keep working, or you have to create the perfect home, and you have to always be happy. I mean, there are endless mandates for a mother, which are, cultural shaming bullshit mandates, I should
correct.
say. um, but
Absolutely.
then, like, if on top of that is some expectation that you have to provide all of the food, you have to make all of the food for yourself and for your family, like, then it becomes a real problem. But if it's in a context of support where, we're not just in our nuclear families where so much of the domestic responsibilities fall to a woman and one woman, then, I think that it becomes a lot less prone to postpartum depression.
hmm
Uh, and there, like, if there can be support, I do think that it's absolutely better for a mother baby unit to be breastfeeding, but it has to be free from some of those mandates and expectations.
Yeah, because that baby blues, postpartum depression, it's a real thing. Thankfully, I'm
Oh,
not at all familiar with it, and I don't really know. I know one woman who kind of briefly we talked about, like a girlfriend of mine, but I it sounds horrendous.
yeah, and it also varies in intensity, and sometimes it can be very intense. People have fantasies of throwing their children out the window, drowning them in the bathtub, like really ending, because every, like, in a way there's the symbolic way that everything has ended,
Right.
as you know it when you have a child. And when there's no support, when there's already a pre-existing, like, propensity towards depression, when the hormones are changing, um, it can kick in really, really difficult ways, and women need support. I mean, there's psychological psychiatric care for postpartum depression, but it also has to be addressed on a cultural level. The more insular our families are, the more it happens.
hmm Yeah, it's a weird. And I think it goes back to a lot of things like having a therapist or having this. doctor or however you want to look at it to speak with for so long. I mean, even growing up, so my parents are divorced. Growing up, we had to go see someone and talk to them, and it was like so shamed and it's like embarrassing, and you don't want. But it's like as an adult, it's almost like this is a privilege, and it's like
Mhm.
it's a luxury to have someone you could talk to and discuss your problems with in an unbiased way, who's only looking out for your best interest. And it's just really interesting because I think that there's still, I think probably an older generation and perhaps even mostly a male thing. They're a little like macho or whatever. I don't need to talk about it. I don't need to discuss it. I don't need to
Mhm.
figure it out. I can
Mhm.
just, live life. But it
Mhm.
is truly such a luxury to have someone to deal with or to talk and figure things out and deal with things aside from your friends who, friends are helpful, but they're your friends. So they're not always going to tell you what is in
Right,
your best
because people
interest.
don't always tell their friends the things that feel most secretive and most shameful
Right.
too. Um, and yeah, that's why it's more than a luxury because especially in things like with postpartum depression, um, it's taking care of yourself allows you to take care of other people, and when you don't, then the things that don't get dealt with get, you know, they
Mhm.
get put onto other people and sometimes ways you don't want.
Well, and raise not only that you don't want, but you don't even know it till it's too late or something like this.
Mhm.
Um, so I am very curious of your take on. So I kind of briefly mentioned it, but it's like there's this pandemic going on,
Mhm.
but the mass other pandemics that are happening.
Yeah.
Um, how do you like with your clients that you have now, or how do you deal with, because I think that this specific pandemic, COVID, has
Mhm.
brought on so many more issues. Like, yes,
Mhm.
there are so many issues happening, but it has brought in so many more things.
Yes.
Um, how do you like, whether it's dating or I don't know, whatever it is, what are the things that you deal with, and like, or maybe the most common theme that you
Mhm.
see
Mhm. Well,
that
I guess the
you
first thing I would answer is related to COVID. Like when someone calls up and says they want to start therapy, the thing we talk about is, what, why do you want to come to therapy? What's the presenting problem?
Mhm.
And what we know is, especially in working with the unconscious, is that the thing that presents is not, it is only the tip of the iceberg. It's not, it's the thing that someone can have language for, but it's not really the thing. There are so many things, and they're embedded in the whole context of the mind, that comes out over the course of therapy. But you only have like a very beginning way of conceptualizing that. And I think COVID is a presenting problem. It's something that we have an international language for. That we we all know now. We still didn't even want to admit it, and early on when it was the problem in China. That but now we know it's a problem that crosses borders. There's something that we cannot pretend isn't there.
right.
But I think that that is because there are all of these other things, like you're saying, the opioid epidemic, how high our suicide rates are. Of course, problems like cancer that are get various levels of attention, but don't get like international attention that says everything must stop because of this. And it's sort of like this fantasy that here we are a day before the end of 2020, and so many people have this fantasy that 2020 is going to be over, COVID's going to be over, climate change, well, we don't like to talk about climate change anyway, so maybe it's never started. Like all of these things are just going to be behind us, when in reality,
It's another day. It just
if,
keeps going.
well, and if we pay attention, there's a language that here's a problem that's only the beginning of all of the problems we've needed to contend with, and we have to face them more than ignore them.
Right. Yeah, it's I think that New Year's is such an interesting time because it's always, so now what am I going to do? And it's like, well, what have you been doing?
Mhm.
Some day is not a day. Like,
Mhm.
there's Monday through Sunday, but some day is not one of those days.
The
Like,
sun's not like, "Oh, guess what? I'm not coming up tomorrow because it's Tuesday," right?
yeah, like, doesn't work that way. If whatever your habits are, like,
Mhm.
start it today
Mhm.
or tomorrow if you must. But if you want to create new, good new habits or whatever it is that you want to make changes, then why wait for the new year?
Yeah, I mean, I think rituals like this are good for our minds where we need a little bit like something concrete, like put it in a box, like start today because you didn't start yesterday.
Yeah,
And but when we try to use that as if the world mimics our mind,
it
like
doesn't.
no. But yeah,
um,
I think that there are a lot of other issues that COVID really brings up, especially, and that's how I've been dealing with it in my practice is that, when people, especially early in the pandemic, were having to be isolated and whatever that looked like, whether that's at home with a partner that they'd rather not see 24/7 or with no one around or with memories of other times when they had been forced into confinement for other traumatic reasons, that these things that usually you could busy yourself about and not need to pay attention to as much, like they were really hitting hard. And it's the things we don't want to do because we like to be fun and not serious, but um there's opportunity, and I think a lot of people have responded to this like opportunity, another kind of, I think, psychic mandate to face the things that are there.
mhm.
um,
Yeah, I wonder why there hasn't been any sort of I mean, I might have missed it, but I haven't seen any sort of this type of thing in the news. Like,
mhm,
I've seen like mental health tips or this type of stuff, but not
mhm,
very direct. Um, because it's like there, yes, there's a disease going around, but
mhm,
the stress and the suicides and the
mhm,
alcoholism and all the other things that are a result, the cause and effect of this, it's
mhm.
just as probably more dangerous than the actual COVID itself.
But that's a good point. I think there is an increase in awareness of mental health needs, like in an urgent way,
Hmm.
where I think there's like in a this level of trauma, I think a lot of people turn to say, like, I've noticed I'm drinking more or whatever. It's feeling more inclined to suicidal ideation, things like that. That is much more about the need for some kind of management in the moment. I think people who are already in therapy and are seem to be more inclined to go deeper
Hmm.
because it's not so much about the management at that moment. And I think what we're going to see is once we have a vaccine that's spread out to enough
Readily
people,
available, yeah.
yeah, that um, and when people begin to feel a bit safer, that these things will, it won't be on such an urgent basis, but all of the things that have been brought up in the last year, whether it's a year and a half, will come to the surface in a way that like I think people are going to be kind of ready for another kind of treatment,
Mhm.
but just sort of like holding on, gripping onto the steering wheel right now.
Yeah, because everything's just so unknown. Like, you can't make plans for anything, whether it's travel plans
Mhm,
or, because that
mhm,
now there's a second strain of sorts
mhm,
coming from the
mhm,
UK or whatever this is they're saying. So it's like everything is just so unknown, whether it's like this is even this one of my girlfriends has a little one who will be a year the first week of January.
mhm,
And before we were talking and she said, and they live in the city, they live in the building right next to us. And she said, yeah, we want to try to start again in September, which was this past September. They wanted to have the kids very close in age. And
Hmm.
she has a few different health issues. Um, so they wanted to do it and I don't, who knows how true it is or whatever, but they say that, this window from shortly after you have a baby, you're very fertile. So they wanted to try to, get pregnant again, blah, blah, blah. And her doctor said, listen, you shouldn't because we don't know how the fetus is going to react to the COVID vaccine when it comes out. And it's crazy to think that people are putting pregnancy on hold because
Hmm.
of this. Like,
Yeah.
it's horrible.
Wow. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that possibility. Interesting. And the baby boom, the COVID baby boom might be followed by a COVID, baby decline.
Yeah. Like, I,
But
I'm sure because it's a frightening thing
mm,
to think. And maybe it's just because, we're in New York or I don't know. I think that also middle America, like I know Michigan, and I don't know if it's true or not. Like you hear things on the news, like the rates are really high and, the percentages are way up and it's crazy and horrible. Yet, like my family there is like, yeah, we don't even see, like they don't have neighbors. They don't see anyone
mm,
because they live in the middle of nowhere. So it's like,
right.
what is this, just Detroit? Or
Hmm.
so it's very interesting because I do think that there's going to be probably a huge decline in
Mm.
deliveries or babies or whatever you want to call
Interesting. I mean, I
it.
think that there are two tendencies in the mind in this level of uncertainty, right? And one is to cling to certainty. It's like we're going to find whatever way we can of dealing with this. Like I need I'm going to have to have a routine that is more
Hmm.
set than it ever was, or like this kind of approach of don't plan. Definitely don't get pregnant right now because you can control that, or things to that effect, which the other mindset is to embrace the uncertainty.
Right.
And I think really we need a balance of both. I mean, we have to plan, but I think as a culture we're such planners, and we have so much anxiety about not being in control, which COVID is a presenting symptom of. And we're not going to solve all of these problems by just trying to have more control. Some of it comes with saying, you know
It is
so
what it is.
right, it is what it is, and we move accordingly, or we change our jobs accordingly, and we let the things happen that are going to happen anyway.
Well, and I think that it goes to I read it somewhere you were writing something of like, we're multiple things. We're It's not like we're just one thing. And we should
Mhm.
never be just one thing. We are multiple things all at once, whether it's, happy and sad or whatever it is. We should never be just one single thing. We should never just be scared. We should never be just,
Right,
the like because we truly are many things, or we should be.
right, right. I mean, and I know a lot of people who've said that this year has been quite good for them. Not good in that it's without tragedy. Is the thing is that
Right.
it's with tragedy, and in the face of those tragedies, losing family members, losing jobs, that there's also a way of contending with, like, this is what I have and who I'm close to and what my life is about, and a stronger sense of purpose. Like
Mhm.
that, because of having tragedy, almost there's a greater sense of what's appreciated.
Well, that and it almost seems like because this year has been so full of tragedy, if
Mhm.
someone says, "Oh, 2020, I can't wait for it to be over. It's been such a shit year, blah blah blah." And if it's like because it's been so bad for so many, you're not allowed to be like, "Actually, it's been an amazing year. I had a kid and I
Mhm.
bought a house and it's been like the best year of my life."
Yeah,
And it's
yes,
like you're not allowed to say that.
you're
Even
allowed to say
though
that. I'm glad. I'm,
well, no, but the truth is that's
yeah.
my response is normally I'm sorry that sucks, but I'm sure there's been something good that's come out of it because,
Mhm.
it's, are you a glass half full or glass half empty, whatever kind of person you are.
Yeah. Well, right. Who mandates whether we're allowed to be excited or not,
Well, and
and what
it's
the
like,
conditions of our excitement are?
exactly. And it's like, it's been such a weird time because if you are a excited, happy person and you could
Mhm.
see it in anything, it's like you're a bad person right now because you have had a great year. And it's really interesting because
Mhm.
all I can ever do is just kind of laugh it off and be on
Mhm.
my merrily way. But
Yeah.
it's like,
Well, what do you do with that? I mean, are you if you're
right,
saying, yeah, like as long as other people are in the gutter and in the streets and having to endure more suffering for your having a great year, right? I think that's kind of a problem. But like, we're not going to fix any of the problems that we're more aware of now if
correct,
we mandate suffering on each other as the only emotion and the
correct.
only experience. Like to do good, you also have to feel good.
Well, and I think part of, I know this is a little like um hippie or whatever, and I'm not so much of a hippie. But I really believe in vibes. So I do think that when I come across someone who's very like meh, and I'm like, I do hope that some of my goodness goes to them. And I
Yeah.
do think that I spread a little bit of goodness of that.
I think you
I hope.
absolutely do. You have such a positive, well, a positive energy, but in a way that's like not pop psychology positive. It's like you seem to really care about everybody you come into contact with and like want to see like what's going on in their lives and to add to that.
Truly, I think that anywhere I go, or you or whoever, anywhere someone goes, they should leave it better than they found it. So,
Mhm.
like, whether it's a little bit of good energy, a little bit of, whatever it is, I wholeheartedly, truly believe that that's what I live by. So
Mhm.
I feel like if I can't do that, then what am I doing?
Yeah.
Um, I feel like we could talk. There's a bunch of other stuff, so we're gonna have to do a part two. Um, like we 100% we're gonna have to do a part two. But what else are you working on? What else do you have anything else to share? Do you want to mention the memoir you're writing, or what's your website? Tell what's going on so I can include links and all this good stuff to share.
Sure. So I'll just briefly say I am working on a memoir, which is also not only about me as all good subjective writing. I think it's a collection of interviews with women speaking about how we know what we know, and it's something I'm so excited to that you invited me to speak here and to see your process of having a baby and then talking to other women about women's experiences because it's very similar. And I think as a woman in this like being sort of thrown into life of like what is going on is and there are things that yeah I know what's going on and also ways that I don't know what your experience is and what your experience is and we learn from each other and I think that's a very womanly thing um, and so I've had some experiences in interviewing um, filmmakers, writers, psychoanalysts, artists that kind of just kept having this energy that was propelling me to write it together, not just about each individual experience, but how those experiences shaped me. That I then went back to writing about my own mother, um, and now one of my children, my one of my daughters, is kind of in this preteen phase of her life, and I think it's something that for me and a lot of women to talk about one thing means to talk about the other. To talk about my experience of having a child and breastfeeding means to talk about my mother and my birth story when I came out of her, which is also to talk about my daughter and her kind of not wanting to become an adolescent and wanting to stay a child, and then to talk about the sexual body and the fear of, why do other people have so much to say about how my body should look? And then, sexual experience and awakenings, and my friend who owns a sex shop, and our experiences together. And so to be able to talk about all of these things alongside one another and interwoven together
Hmm.
has been like a really transformative process for me as a woman, and I'm really excited to hopefully within a couple years time really share that with the rest of the world.
It's an interesting thing. Well, there's a bunch of things there that I'm like, ding, I want to. So, with having a daughter, and
Hmm.
you have two daughters,
Hmm.
and having a son, I'm sure it's totally a whole different thing. But
Yeah.
for me, with having a daughter, I think, and you look and you see, and it's like, do I want to raise her that way? What do I want to, how do I want to talk to her about these subjects? Do I want to be open? Because I'm a person who's very like, when I was growing up, my mom would walk around the house in her sports bra, and we're very not so modest. But as my mom's gotten older, she's gotten more modest and is very covered up or whatever. But I
Hmm.
always walk around in a sports bra, and I'm just very
Hmm.
free and flowy or whatever you want to, whatever it is. And
Hmm.
I think like, is that appropriate? Is this something I'm allowed to do? Am I supposed to change what I wear? Like,
Hmm.
how do you talk about, sex, or do you not, or do you? And it's like, the more that I've spoken with women on here, especially, it's like, there should be more of an education on, rather than how not to get pregnant, how you do
Hmm.
get pregnant, and
Yeah.
how and it's just, there's just so much that, and maybe it's because times were just so different, and things are just, it's a whole new
Hmm.
generation now. But there's just so much that I think, how am I going to talk to her about this, like, how do you
And I think the
formulate and
one saving grace is that we have awareness that it's not sitting down in one awkward conversation to have a sex talk, right?
right.
It's called life. It's called like you are a full woman, and you are every day of your life being in that womanliness
Hmm.
and being with your daughter in who she is as a child, who she'll be as a girl, who she will become as an adolescent and as a woman. And these are lifelong conversations.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been thinking a lot about, yeah, as you say, there's the how not to get pregnant and how to get pregnant pieces of the conversation, but our sex education, our way of thinking about sex is still so backwards.
Yeah.
um, I mean, just first of all, what about masturbation? What about your individual body? And we're having these conversations with my kids recently, and it's like, yeah, we know what intercourse is, we know what condoms are, we know what certain aspects of, we know what abortions are, but do we know what masturbation is? Like, that's just sort of a becoming in the conversation. And when you think about development, like that happens first. It happens before you ever
100%.
even know what a condom is. And and I think that the more we are comfortable with our own bodies as women and with our own sexual experiences, first of all being like self-contained
Hmm.
out of our own desire instead of as the object of someone else's desire, like these conversations are only going to improve and be more holistic.
Yeah, it's such a good point, because it's like, women generally are so looked at as sex objects, right? And
Hmm.
that's fine, whatever. But it's like, if a woman knew how to please herself,
Hmm.
like through masturbation, she fit, or a girl, a teenager, a 20-year-old, whatever, she figured out her own mechanics, essentially.
Hmm.
She wouldn't feel like, it would be basically, to some degree, how men are. Like,
Hmm.
I know what pleases me,
Yeah. Right.
so I'm not going to take less than that.
Hmm.
Where women always take less than that, because maybe she never orgasmed, or she thought she did, or
Hmm.
whatever it is, or she faked it and this is just what it is. But it
Hmm.
really isn't just that, because nowadays sex is, it's just, depending who you talk to, it's just sex. Like, and
Hmm.
obviously it depends on your purpose and where you are in life and whatever.
Hmm.
But it's like, as a kid, a 20-year-old, a teen, or however old you are, or
Hmm.
later when you're not trying to have a kid,
Yeah.
sex should be enjoyable. Even when you're having a kid, it should still be enjoyable. But my
Right.
point is it's not just about the guy. It should be about both the male
Right.
and female. And it is an interesting point that you bring up about how do you talk to your daughter about that? Because I never spoke with my mom about this, but it
Hmm.
is something that I always like. It's something that I'm probably the most open of my girlfriends, or maybe not the
Hmm.
most open, but I'm very open. But it's like
Hmm.
I hear girls saying crazy things,
Hmm.
and then, like, literally, this is a little piece of blurb. His dick was so big, but I don't know if I came. And I'm like, how,
Yeah.
why does
Yeah.
it matter how big he is? Like, it's just in the way that females talk. And it's like, that's fine that you want to talk that way, but you should really figure out your body and
Hmm.
what's going on with you before. I don't know. I just feel like there's so much more pleasure that could be had and enjoyment, and like so
Hmm.
much more could come out of it, literally, pun intended, if 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 they knew how their body worked.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and it's like what you're saying about it's fine to be an object of desire. We all want to be desired. But what's difficult is that, how does the individual work in relationship to the other? Do we also get to be desiring subjects
Yeah.
who have a say of what feels good to me and who I desire? And so I think if it then it starts in the way we think about sex education, even the way we think about our daughters and our sons' bodies, and how we're willing to talk to them about it. I
Mhm.
mean, like, having teenagers, a boy and a girl, is like, I mean, they're preteens, right? They're not even teenagers yet, and my mind is already blown. And like, I'm having just another phase of like reckoning and awakening, which is amazing and terrifying. Um, that Yeah, there are certain ways that we sort of just culturally not wired to talk to girls about their bodies, and I think, um, like, as a child's mind, it must be so confusing to say, um, you're going to want to have sex, but people get pregnant when they have sex, and let's tell you how not to get pregnant. Then I think a child's mind, I mean, I know that it looks at all of that data and says, why do people have sex? This doesn't make any sense. And so if you leave out the pleasure part of it, of course it's not going to make sense. But when we leave out the pleasure, we're leaving out the mystery.
Correct.
And to my mind, this is where the sexual body is the maternal body. That, like, breasts and vaginas and all of it, they're amazing, and they're like crazy making, and they're mysterious, and they're enigmatic, and they're not supposed to make sense on a certain level. And like, that's why I think we're having the conversation about the sexual body.
It's a wild, I mean, I'm sure I'll be there before I know it, this conversation with her. But it is it's I mean, I get why schools don't, and I mean, it's been a long time, so I don't really remember what was
Yeah.
said during when I was in school, but I do think that there needs to be so much more, even if it's not at school, even if it's like, a hired out external party to explain these things, because not all kids have great home lives.
Right.
And the sad part is most of the kids that don't have great home lives are probably the ones who are getting pregnant and end up, in a position that isn't an ideal position, because, they're out exploring and trying things that whatever.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think in there is like why it's so dangerous to talk about desire, because we're afraid as fuck of what who is allowed to do it, and is it only something that, like, kids who are in bad home lives are gonna, like, they're gonna mess up their lives more. And I mean, that's one aspect of it, and why we need a lot of guidance and protection. But there's probably been a lot of prohibition on women's desire in general,
Yeah.
because
Well, it's
uh,
still almost 2021 and it's still so I don't think it's quite taboo, but
mhm,
it's still, such a shady topic to talk about and it's so um
mhm,
it's just not discussed openly and freely like it should be because our bodies are the ones that are creating humans. Our bodies are the
mhm,
masterpieces. Like,
mhm. Right, right. They're amazing.
yeah, they are. And I think that, I don't think that it's too late, but
Hmm.
sadly, it's like when you have a kid, once you get to that point of being a mom, you're already past that. Like, it has to be addressed sooner. It has to be addressed when kids are young.
Hmm.
Hmm. Well, as I said, part two. We have obviously so much more to talk about.
That'll be fantastic. I mean, I'd love to share about where my practice is going when things open back up, and I'll have a lot more to share with you then. And as our kids get older, I'm sure I'll have some updates on my thinking um, on preteen kids.
And how you are sharing things and tips and advice you suggest.
Yeah, this has been really fabulous. Thanks, Ariel.
Of course, my pleasure. Hold on. And your website, real quick. Tracy,
Yeah, at Tracy Sidesinger PsyD.com.
cool. And are you having people follow you on social media?
Yes, I'm on Instagram, NYC Depth Psychologist.
Okay, I'll do a little link so they can see.
Great.
And anything else?
That's it for now, and I'll let you know when I have some updates.
Deal.